So we're gonna go ahead and get started. This is, again, I'm Diane Stair-Fenner, and we're gonna collaborate today on how teachers can advocate for English learners. And I wanted to let you know, if you happen to be on Twitter, a hashtag we use to bring a group of like-minded people together around this topic is hashtag advocacy and the number 4 L's. So hopefully if you use that means of social media, you can go ahead and use that hashtag to talk about our themes from today. And I also wanted to let you know that we're recording this webinar, and after we are finished with it, we'll send you all the link to it so you can play it with your colleagues and refer to it whenever you would like. And I'd also like to say thank you to Marilyn Teasall for helping to organize this today. We originally talked about me working with them face-to-face, but the logistics weren't working out so well for that, so we decided to go ahead and offer this as a webinar and open it up to anyone who'd like to join, even if you're not a member of Marilyn Teasall. So thank you so much, everyone. And thanks everyone for typing in the chat and getting to know each other a little bit before we began. So we're going to open up then with a poll, and we're going to have a few polls today during our session. And let me get it started. Poll number 1. I'd like you to take a minute and click on what is your role. You can only choose one role, either an ESOL teacher, content or grade level teacher, a building administrator, a district administrator, maybe you're in higher education or adult education. You might be a consultant or a researcher or that wonderful topic other. So go ahead and take part in the poll today. And almost everybody has responded. I'll give you another minute or so. And sometimes your role doesn't neatly fit into one bucket here that's listed, but hopefully we can describe mostly what you do here. So almost everyone has had a chance to respond. And some of you are responding in the chat, but also go ahead and click on the best link for you in the poll. And I'm going to go ahead and end it. Not quite everybody voted, but you can see, hopefully you can see the results that I'm sharing, that most of you are ESOL teachers, followed by content teachers or other, and we have some consultants and researchers in the mix as well. So thank you for taking part in that poll so we can get to know you a bit better. And I also want to familiarize you a little bit with our platform called Zoom. Hopefully you've downloaded the app, and this is what your control bar looks like. And we have a Q&A button to ask specific content questions, and we'll probably do that more at the end of our presentation. And a lot of you have been using the chat button to comment or tell us about any technical difficulties. And again, we'll send you a copy of the presentation and a recording afterwards. So today we only have about an hour together, but yeah, and someone asked if your sound is muted. Yes, your sound is muted, but you can only hear me. So you're muted and you don't have video set up. So our agenda today is to welcome you and talk about why we're advocating for ELS, and then defining EL advocacy. We'll work on isolating an EL advocacy issue, highlighting 3 key EL advocacy issues. Then I'll share steps and tools to advocate for ELS around each issue. I'll give you a chance to apply your EL advocacy skills, and we'll have a general question and answer session and a wrap-up. And like I shared earlier, we're recording this webinar, and if you're on Twitter, we created the hashtag Advocacy for ELS to come together on this topic. And we've also shared with you by an email today a webinar handout. So I encourage you to take these tools and bring them back to your context and use them and make copies and share them with your colleagues and do some professional development yourself around this topic. So in your handout, and I'll be referring to this as we go through our session today, you have an EL scheduling tool. You have a handout on suggested scaffolds at each proficiency level. There's a formative assessment checklist for English learners. There are recommendations for computer-based EL assessment. And then you have an English learner advocacy action plan. And you can find all of these tools also on our website. And that URL is listed at the bottom left, getsupported.net/free tools. And today, hopefully you checked your email that you saw a Padlet that we've created on this topic of advocacy. And we've pre-populated it with the materials that we're discussing today. And at any time, you can go onto that Padlet, and the URL is at your bottom left of your screen. You can click on the little pink plus button on the bottom right that you see of your screen when you're online. And you can add any questions, comments, and resources that you might have. But it's a great way for us to continue our conversation after our short amount of time today. So this is me presenting. So I'm Diane Stair-Fenner. I'm the president of Support Ed, and we're a woman-owned small business based outside of in the Washington, D.C. region. And we provide professional development online and face-to-face, all in support of English learners and their educators and families. And so here's a sampling of 3 of the books that I've written, and I'll be referring to a couple of these books later in the presentation and throughout. So here's a little bit about me and a little bit of my own advocacy story. So this is me in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. I grew up on a dairy farm in central New York. And here is a sample of one of my 4-H projects growing up. But I always loved language and culture and wanted to learn more languages and study abroad and live abroad. And so I had the opportunity, you can see in the middle picture on the top row, I had the opportunity as a Fulbright student, a Fulbright teacher, to work and teach in the former East Berlin, Germany, which I loved, and I started getting interested in teaching English as a foreign language there. And then following that, while I was doing my Master's of Arts in Teaching at the School for International Training in Vermont, I was able to do student teaching in Veracruz, Mexico. And then I returned to Veracruz as a 6th grade teacher in a bilingual setting. And in that setting, it was a private school, and I taught very usually well-to-do families who were able to afford such an education. And coming back to the States, I ended up getting an ESL job in North Carolina, which is symbolized by the bottom left-hand picture, where I taught students mostly of migrant workers who were either coming to work in the migrant stream that would take them to North Carolina for the tobacco planting and melons also, but also a lot of the migrant ended up staying there, and their kids stayed in the schools. But it was during that time that I really discovered about advocacy and what it meant. There was such a disparity between the Mexican students I taught in Mexico and the Mexican population that I taught in North Carolina. And I ended up working very closely with my principal and my paraprofessional to try and include the families, to try and provide some professional development for content teachers as this population was growing, and made a lot of mistakes along the way, learned a lot, really learned about developing allies in the process, and getting buy-in from other teachers and staff. So I took those experiences with me then when I moved to Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia, which is the 10th largest school district in the US with a very established ESOL program. But there was still a lot of advocacy to be done there. And again, just like in North Carolina, I was advocating, but I didn't know that it was called advocating. It was just called doing the right thing and showing, sometimes just showing some human decency and care and empathy. And after Fairfax County, I took a leave of absence after my second and third child was born, and I was a consultant with TESOL International Association, working on, at the time, developing and revising the new standards for teacher certification with TESOL. And I had just at the time given a presentation about these new standards and highlighted how advocacy was a major portion of the newly revised standards. This was in 2009. And someone in the audience asked me, well, you know, if advocacy is so important, then I'm a professor. What book can you recommend on advocating for English learners? And I didn't have an answer. And it was that day, coming back from this presentation in Denver, Colorado, that I decided to write a book about advocating for English learners. I'm sharing with you, you might be familiar with my Advocating for English Learners book. It's a bestseller through Corwin and also co-published by TESOL. So these are the chapter titles for it, if you're interested in taking a look at it. So I'll be drawing from some of the information in this book as we progress. Oh, if I'm able to advance, here we go. So we're going to start off by talking about defining English learner advocacy. So I will give you a minute to enter your definition of EL advocacy in the chat box. So go ahead and take a moment. So I see a couple of you now, they're coming in now, your responses. Giving English learners a voice, providing access and opportunity. Excuse me, watching out for students. Standing up for the disenfranchised. Wonderful. Providing resources. Being a voice for students, clearing barriers. Oh, there's so many great responses. Creating awareness, essential part of our job. Absolutely. Keep on typing those. I'm going to go ahead and share a bit of information on the word advocacy. So, you know, as teachers of English learners, we like to talk about word origins. So you might be interested in what the origin of the word advocacy is. So it comes from the Latin advocatus, meaning one called to aid, and also speaking or acting on behalf of another. And some cognates, which you may know are words that sound the same and have similar meanings in different languages, are abogado, advogado, or avocat in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And so if you speak one of those languages, you know that that means to be an attorney, actually. So advocating on someone's behalf, I think of an attorney who can help me kind of navigate an unfamiliar situation. They're on my side and they're helping me and really, you know, working on my behalf, not for themselves, but for me. So in doing some research before and while I was writing my advocacy book, I surveyed some teachers to ask them some quotes about how do they advocate, what do they do? So here are a couple of quotes that you might like to read. I especially like the one on the upper right that says, "I'm the biggest supporter of ELS education in my school. My advocacy for them sometimes gets me in trouble. Administration gets tired of hearing me." I love that because I've found that the same to be true in my own work. And so, yeah, I heard a little bit of your definitions. And I'd like you to share mine, which is always evolving as well. So working for ELS equitable and excellent education by taking appropriate actions on their behalf. And noting that excellent does not always mean equitable and excellent are not always synonymous depending on the situation. And also having a deep understanding about each EL and family's background to be able to know which appropriate action to take. So we have to really understand where our students and families are coming from to know what's appropriate, to know exactly how to advocate. And also stepping in and providing a voice for those students and their families who have not yet developed their own strong voice in their education. And the word "yet" is so crucial because it assumes that they're going to get there, they're going to develop this voice, and it's our job to help them achieve that goal. And so in thinking about advocacy, I also coined the term scaffolded advocacy. So you might be familiar with the term scaffolding in instruction. where we're providing the just right amount of support for our English learners as they develop proficiency in English. And our goal is to gradually remove those scaffolds so they can complete tasks independently. Well, the same is true for advocacy as well, that we have to scaffold our level of advocacy that we're giving to our students and families. We can't do it. We just can't do it full on with everyone all the time. And the goal also then is for our students and families to develop their own voice in their advocacy so they're able then to advocate effectively for themselves. Because we're always getting new students. Our students and families are always encountering different situations where they might need more or less advocacy. So hopefully you like my very scientific chart here that shows the amount of advocacy we need to provide really depends on the family situation, the EL and family needs. Where students who might require more advocacy might be newcomers, they might have lower levels of literacy, they might be undocumented, or going through some kind of trauma, or all of the above. Whereas our students who have been here longer, maybe the parents speak more English, maybe their immigration status is resolved, they might require less of our advocacy efforts. So one more item that we're going to apply later on is this wonderful National Education Association 5-step EL advocacy framework. And my colleagues and I were very fortunate to have been working with the NEA over the past few years when they were delving pretty deeply into this topic. And, it's great to advocate, but we also need a framework. We need some solid steps and practical steps to get there. And we'll be talking about these steps throughout the webinar. And again, you'll be able to apply these to an issue you might want to focus on. So the first step is isolating the issue. So figure out what it is that you want to advocate about. And I'll give you some criteria for that in just a bit. Again, you can't do everything at once. So to be the most effective, you have to choose your issue wisely. And along those lines goes with choosing your allies wisely. You can advocate by yourself, but you'll be much more effective if you're doing it with others who share the same passion as you do. And the third step is being clear on the rights of ELS, so knowing what their rights are in a particular situation to be able to most effectively advocate for them. And the fourth step is to organize and educate others. So start reaching out and bringing a group together, making a plan, having some clear steps, and educating others that might want to work on this topic. And finally, identifying your outlets for change. So once you've garnered this momentum, where are you going to go to work to get this change happening? Will it be with your administration, in the community at large? So think about where you might want to go from here. So we're going to focus first on step 1, which is isolating your EL advocacy issue. And I'd like to show you the ripple effect of EL advocacy, which comes from one teacher advocating for ELS in his or her classroom. Then you can work with other teachers to advocate outside your classroom. You could have a group of educators at the school level, and then a group of educators advocating at the district level. You could go on to a state or a national level. But in doing so and seeing how much of an impact you can have, it's also important to think about the next piece, which is prioritizing your advocacy, so your sphere of influence. So think about, what do you have control over in your environment, and what do you not have control over? And when you're then prioritizing what your advocacy is going to be, you definitely would want to focus on what you have control over. So an area in which you might be able to make a change, and start with that first, and working in small steps to advocate around that topic. So I want to get you thinking about this a little bit. And in the chat box, maybe think about an item or two that you might have control over in your environment. And/or you could write about, how would you describe your current sphere of influence? Are you at the classroom level, grade, school, etc.? And who might some of your allies be to widen your sphere of influence? So take a minute and type these responses in in the chat box, and we can share in a bit, and you can see what others are feeling. So again, reflect on where you are in your EL advocacy and think about what you have control over in your environment. So I think in particular about, it's for many of us, testing season is coming along. What do you have control over, for example, in testing or assessment of English learners? Where might some areas be, or what's your sphere of influence when it comes to a specific issue? And who could your allies be? And Michelle is writing that the classroom and grade level are her spheres of influence. And Melissa is saying that she has control over her teaching and providing support to her students. Yes, and there's so many areas in which you can advocate there. And now they are certainly coming in, these responses. And you can compare where you are, in your own sphere of influence or what you have control over to that of what your colleagues are typing. Yeah, so there is so much. Yeah, oh, and we have a school psychologist with us. That is wonderful. We love you. Yes, and a lot of you saying that you can control instruction and classroom teaching and support and test accommodations. Wonderful. We have a district coach who can meet with principals and coaches. So there's so many areas in which you can advocate and have just such a great influence over positive things happening for your students. So we're going to go ahead and move on a little bit and look at some EL advocacy issues. But before we start that, I'd like to look at just, think of a little bit more globally. What are some national EL advocacy issues we're seeing? So some things we're seeing are creating inclusive programming and instruction for English learners, so not pulling them out, but creating more of co-teaching and collaborative environments. Knowing where and how to begin advocating. Are we advocating for their success beyond grade 12? Are we positioning them to be able to graduate and be successful in college or career afterwards? Do we work with ELS from an assets perspective, or do people, tend to look at them as a deficit? How about EL family engagement? That's definitely an area that I see when I work with districts across the country around this topic. And also cultural awareness of ELS and their families. So I'd like to give you a chance to respond to the same question through a poll. And this is our second poll of our global issues. So which of the few advocacy issues I've listed is the most important to you? And you can only choose one. So we have inclusive programming and instruction, knowing where and how to start advocating, EL success beyond grade 12, the assets-based perspective, EL family engagement, and cultural awareness of ELs and their families. So I'm able to see how many of you have responded, and I'll wait until we have, a good 3/4 of you. So definitely. So right now I'm seeing, before I share the results, that inclusive programming and instruction is coming in first. Cultural awareness is coming in next from what I see. And I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and share the results with you. So you can see that 35% of you said inclusive programming and instruction, 19% said cultural awareness, followed by equitable assessment and assets-based perspective. Great, so thank you for participating in that poll. So next, I'd like to highlight just 3 key advocacy issues that I see in work I do with the school districts and teachers of ELS. So the first, which also correlates to how you responded to the poll, which is nice, is inclusive programming and instruction for ELS. So I'll share a little bit about that next. And the second is equitable assessment of ELS, especially this time of year we see that. And the third area is knowing where and how to start advocating. And that's when Maryland TESOL reached out to me about doing a session with them, this was really the focus that they wanted to see the most with their members. And I definitely see it across districts. So going a little bit more in depth on each of these issues. So some issues around inclusive programming and instruction are, how do you set up programming in different contexts? For example, some schools and districts might have low incidences of English learners, whereas in other districts, they're the majority of students. Also, how do we get teachers to see themselves that all teachers are teachers of English learners, not only the ESOL or EL or bilingual teacher? How do we ensure that effective strategies are incorporated in instruction all day long, not only when working with an ESOL teacher? And how do we foster that collaboration? Those are definitely big areas of advocacy that we need to see. And the second area is equitable assessment of English learners. And assessment is also a chapter in my advocacy book, and so important, more and more important every time we look at it. So some of the issues are validity of assessments, making sure that assessments measure what they're intended to measure, that they're not de facto measures of language instead of content. Also, scaffolding assessments. Oftentimes, teachers can scaffold instruction, but then not carry that over to assessments. A third area is equitable grading of English learners. And this was our previous webinar last month that we co-hosted with Larry Ferlazzo, where this is a very big advocacy issue that really needs to be discussed more, and we need more resources there. And finally, advocating about the use of computer-based assessments and platforms. Our English learners definitely need more practice with these platforms to lighten the linguistic load, to give them a better chance to demonstrate what they know and can do. And the final area that I'll touch on is knowing where and how to start advocating for English learners. So some issues are, we need practical steps to begin our advocacy. We need ways to be able to showcase and leverage each of our different areas of expertise when collaborating and advocating. We also need help in finding and cultivating relationships with allies so we can advocate together and not separately. And finally, we need to be able to build trust and build our trust in others and others' trust in us to be able to benefit our students. So we're going to take one more poll. Of these three issues, I'd like to see which would be the top issue for you that we just discussed. So you get to narrow down your focus a little bit more too. So this is just a very quick poll. So which advocacy issue is the most important to you of the three mentioned? Inclusive programming, equitable assessment, or knowing where and how to start advocating for English learners? So we've got about 65% of you have voted right now, so I'll let a couple more take part. And then I will share the results with you. So still, most of you said inclusive programming and instruction for ELS, followed by assessment, and then knowing where and how to start advocating for ELS. So great. So for each of these areas, now, I'm a very practical person. As I shared, I grew up on a dairy farm, and I like to have tools and solutions for issues that I come across. So I'll share with you some steps and tools to advocate for ELS for each of these three issues. And so the first issue, if you recall, was inclusive programming and instruction for English learners. And this is again, if you see the little handout icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, it means that this is included in your handout, and you can also find it on our website. So we've been working with a school district in central New York that's received an incredible amount of English learners over the past few years. And they wanted some guidelines from our group, from Support Ed, about scheduling English learners. So we took a lot of information through our time as administrators in large school districts and school districts with rapidly increasing numbers of English learners. and we created an infographic about general scheduling for ELS and their teachers. And we're also working with Los Angeles Unified School District to rewrite their English learner master plan. And they like this so much, they're including this in their master plan, which is wonderful. So this document just gives recommendations for English learners and for teachers and how to schedule and content classes, and making sure, you know, if you're working in a more inclusive setting, how to do that, and when, if at all, you can poll English learners for separate ESOL instruction. And we also give some guidelines for small populations, moderate-sized populations, and large populations. And not all of the infographic fit onto this slide, so I encourage you to take a deeper look at it on the handout. So it is a good place to begin to have structured conversations around programming and scheduling, because it's such an important part of our English learners' experience in their day. The next area, tool in this area of inclusive programming is just a quick guide for suggested scaffolds at each proficiency level. And again, this is in your handout as well. And this is a tool that you can share. If you're an ESOL teacher, you could share it with content teachers to start thinking about where and how you can scaffold depending on English language proficiency level. And this is a resource in our book, Unlocking English Learners' Potential, page 72, if you happen to have it in front of you, which shows just our suggestions, and it's growing, it's always evolving, and it's, you know, it's something that you can take and adapt on your own. Just some scaffolds by level. So at the beginning level, we suggest giving access to text, video, and instructions in the home language if possible, as well as in English, giving sentence frames and word walls, and reducing the linguistic load for language. At the intermediate level, we also give the same guidelines, the same suggestions to access to text and video, giving sentence stems, so taking a little bit of that scaffolding away, but still giving word walls and word banks. And at the advanced level, we suggest looking at the scaffolds for all levels. So giving concise background knowledge, pre-taught vocabulary, graphic organizers, and you can read the rest of the list. And again, I encourage you to take this and share it with colleagues, adapt it, use it, and create your own, just as a way to start these really crucial conversations around scaffolding instruction, especially when we know that an ESOL or ESL, ELL teacher can't be there all day. And our second area in which more advocacy is in equitable assessment of English learners. So we've created an EL formative assessment checklist. Again, it's another resource from our Unlocking English Learners' Potential book, and it's in your handout. And this is a checklist that you can use if you're collaborating on creating assessments, or maybe you're looking at a colleague's assessment, or you'd like to self-assess your own formative assessment or summative assessment, and just some criteria that you can use to help you gauge whether you're on track for this assessment being a valid measure of what ELs know and can do. And so we've provided some criteria. For example, is the assessment aligned to standards and objectives? Are the instructions easy to understand? Is the format familiar to students? Number 4 is, are the assessment questions linguistically accessible? Number 5 is, are the questions, tasks, or prompts free from cultural bias? Number 6, does the scoring directly correlate to the construct being assessed? And finally, number 7, is the assessment, does it include appropriate scaffolds like we just discussed? So again, please take this and share it and use it in your context. And our next tool is recommendations for computer-based EL assessments. And this is again to be found in our Unlocking English Learners' Potential book. And so we share 5 recommendations also for how we can include English learners more thoughtfully as more and more states move towards using computer-based EL assessments. And for example, if you're a WIDA state, you're doing this already with Access for ELS. So we recommend providing some extra supports for English learners so that they're more ready to take computer-based EL assessment. So teaching them the terms that they'll need to navigate a particular platform. So going and looking at some test questions and looking at the terms, maybe creating a word wall of that students can refer to of the terms they'll see on a assessment platform, and working with them. As spending some time practicing test items and working with the platform. Number 3 is making sure they have access to keyboarding skills, and that's important as well. A lot of times our students are familiar with using like a smartphone or a tablet, but they might not be as familiar with a mouse or a keyboard. Our 4th recommendation is collaborating with content teachers and test specialists about accessibility tools, supports, and accommodations. And our final recommendation is to make sure parents and caregivers are aware of what the test requirements and platform look like. So having a parent meeting might be a very enriching experience for the parents to share this kind of information with them. So they're aware of the process as well, parents and family members. And our 3rd area in which more EL advocacy is needed is knowing where and how to start advocating. And so in my book, Advocating for English Learners, I talk about a framework for sharing the responsibility and also the joy for English learners' education. So, you know, we want to make sure that everyone thinks of teaching English learners as their kids. We know that English learners are everyone's kids, but how do you get there? And how can you move the needle a little or a lot eventually and get everyone on board with you if you might feel like you're the only voice in your school or one of the few voices who are true supporters of English learners? And so in the book, I talk about a framework of first having educators examine their beliefs and expectations about language and working with English learners. And in the book, I provide some tools to do that, to really look at, you know, sometimes people can feel threatened when an influx of students are coming in who speak another language, who might have a different culture. They could make some people uncomfortable. And along those lines is educators reflecting on their own culture and its impact on their teaching. Many times, teachers might not even realize that they bring a culture with them, even if it's a hidden culture or not a surface level aspect of their culture. And it's really important to reflect on all of our cultures and how they can inform or impact our teaching, especially of English learners. The next step and the next area to help share the responsibility and also the joy for ELS education is to help develop empathy for ELS and their families. And maybe if some of you have some ideas for how you develop this empathy in others, you could add them and type them into the chat. It's so, you know, it's so important, especially if some of the teachers we work with might not know another language, or might not have lived in another culture, might not have experienced what it's like to be an English learner or to be an English learner themselves. And again, I have some exercises and some tools in the book to be able to develop this empathy. And next, the last area is fostering this collaboration among ESOL teachers, content teachers, and administrators, which is so crucial. So part of that is creating a time and a space for collaboration, making sure your administrators are on board for it. And maybe if you don't have official time to collaborate, doing it, you know, in creative ways. It might even be in a hallway. It might be sharing a Google Doc of lesson plans, or creating a graphic organizer, or what I call a goodie to give to a content teacher to encourage the instruction and scaffolding in the classroom. And some of you are typing in responses as well. Nicole is adding that the empathy part is so essential, especially given the recent hateful language and sentiment toward immigrants. Absolutely, and you know, developing this empathy is definitely crucial. So thanks for adding your own comments, and please keep commenting on what I'm saying as we go along. And the next tool I'm giving you to help give you a place and ground you in your advocacy and getting started is an EL Advocacy Action Plan. So you can take this and print it and help it help you focus on which area you might like to talk about and to focus your advocacy efforts on, and to create a short-term goal and a long-term goal and develop some steps to get there. What concrete steps will you take to advocate around this issue? What will your actions be, and what kind of allies and support will you need to really accomplish this step? And in keeping this in mind, it's always important to realize that we're doing this every day and we're advocating every day in our context. And oftentimes we often think of what our failures are, but not our successes. So it's really important, and maybe this is a space where we can do this today among supportive colleagues, is to think about what's a success you've had in advocacy and maybe enter it, even if it's a small one, it's a baby step, just to share with others here. Jennifer's asking if anyone ever gets negativity when it comes to collaboration with teachers. She says, for example, a teacher almost treats you like the enemy instead of a person who's there to help the EL and help the teacher. Yes, and someone asks that they said that I always felt that advocacy was doing the right thing. How do you help make others feel that way? For me, it's keeping a focus on the students and helping people see the long-term benefits of truly supporting our students and their families. And in Fairfax County, where I was a teacher and administrator for a decade, we looked at our data and we saw that our students who had exited English learner status, if we followed them long-term, we saw that they actually outperformed native English speakers and monolinguals on state content assessments. So that said to us, if we devote the time and the resources and the efforts into spending some extra time and providing them some extra supports, after they exit our program, they're going to actually do better than the monolingual population. And sharing data like that is so powerful with others. And maybe some of you can share how you help develop others' empathy as well. And our final part of our time today is to help you apply your EL advocacy skills. And a lot of you are sharing, what strategies you have in the chat, which is wonderful. So what I'm gonna have you do for the rest of our time today, if you choose, if it's more beneficial for you to keep chatting and bouncing ideas off of others, please do so. So if you'd like, I'd like you to choose one EL advocacy issue and apply the 5 NE advocacy steps, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, and then discuss how you might use one of the advocacy tools I shared, or maybe another tool you might need. So here's our space for the application. So the 3 areas we talked about were programming and instruction, equitable assessment, and knowing where and how to start advocating for ELS. And here are the 5 steps. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how you might advocate. What are some steps you might take? What are some tools that I shared that you might use, or other tools that you might need? And so just, jot down some of your thoughts about how you're going to apply what we've been talking about in terms of advocacy moving forward. Luis, hi Luis, I see you're here from Maryland. That he's been able to create a collaborative plan among administrators, counselors, and make sure his newcomers get an appropriate class schedule. And maybe on the Padlet, Luis, you could share, if you'd like to, an example of what a planning template might look like. And a lot of you are typing in about the rights and laws in Ohio, and what you're doing in co-taught EL classes. And Pat is writing that equitable assessment and computer-based state testing is an area where she would like to focus on advocacy. Jeanette says she teaches adults. Jeanette, there are definitely different issues, but certainly a lot of advocacy needs to happen with the adults as well. So some of you, Darlene says she has a few teachers who can see ELS as assets and they can best speak to others, right? Sometimes when it's coming from someone else instead of you, that could be a very effective means of advocacy as well. Right. And so, you know, the newcomer situation can be challenging as well, where some teachers are more receptive to newcomers than others. And that's definitely one of our recommendations is if you're grouping students, place them in classrooms where you know that the teachers are more receptive, even if they don't have necessarily the ESOL training or, you know, an add-on certificate or an endorsement. Just having that open mind is such a huge first step to be able to effectively advocate. And Cami says that she does a training with new teachers each year on how to use proficiency levels and WIDA can-dos with strategies that help all students. Great. A lot of you are typing in resources that you're using and PLCs that you're doing and co-teaching that you're doing. So I encourage you afterwards to add these suggestions and resources on our Padlet, and you can keep typing in the chat. And so our last poll is to see in which area of EL advocacy of the 5 steps you think you might need the most support. And so is it in isolating the issue, choosing your allies, being clear on the rights of English learners, organizing and educating others, or identifying your outlets for change? So where do you need the most support at this point in time? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So it looks like organizing and educating others seems to be the biggest area with 45%, and also identifying outlets for change. It seems like isolating the issue, you've got that down, and choosing your allies. You generally know who to work with and who you would like to work with. So great, that really helps us all have a sense of where everyone's coming from. So we have time now for a Q&A and wrap up. And in this section, you've been using the chat, but I'd like you to use the Q&A feature, and that way it's easier for me to track your questions. And to type in any remaining questions, comments, or suggestions about advocating for ELS, and I'll be able to respond to the questions that I see. So one of you, Emily, hi Emily, asks, what do you say to an ESOL colleague who believes she needs to remove ELS from whole group instruction to help them because the instruction is going too fast? So, and remember to type your questions in the Q&A, you know, so that way it's much easier to track them. And so, yeah, Emily, this is a really important point. And I know you're in New York State where you're mandated to co-teach with ELS for a good, you know, most of their time with you. You can only remove them for specific periods. So in this situation, I would want to talk to the ESOL colleague and then also bring in the content teacher from the whole group instruction to see what could be done to slow down the instruction a bit, or to scaffold the instruction, or to give some maybe alternate tasks to the students, and also to see if there are any red flags in that co-teaching relationship, to be able to see, you know, what areas we can provide more help and more scaffolding. And Pat asked, how do we advocate at the state level for our ELS as it is related to computer-based state testing? Yeah, that's a great question. You know, making sure one step is letting your district know that you're interested, because they might be the biggest path and the most directed path to the state level conversations that are going on, and also finding out when district and or state level meetings might be taking place, And insert, if you're not invited to the conversations, getting yourself invited, finding out and saying, hey, I'd like to come. It's really important that we have a representative for ELLs on behalf of these conversations that we can advocate. So again, I recommend finding out more about district level routes, talking to assessment people at the district level to see then who your allies, who the people in positions of power would be at the state. So you can then get yourself invited and inserted into those policy conversations. Michelle says that creating alternate tasks is necessary during certain parts of the school day when teaching whole group. Any ideas for that? And she teaches in a grades 3 to 5 intermediate school. So yeah, definitely it's a matter of collaboration and of setting the time up to create these tasks collaboratively that you can use then in future years. And again, it's more time up front to do this, but definitely well worth it. And Tara asks, how do we get more funding to have more ESOL teachers and more ESOL coaches who work with mainstream teachers? She says, I feel many mainstream teachers have limited training in ESOL and not much is done to change that. That's surprising in this increasingly test-oriented area. We need all teachers to be prepared to teach ELS. Yeah, that's definitely an area for advocacy, and I'm not sure if you're at the district level and you know, where you could go for that. But, you know, we've worked with some school districts before to help them, give them support in crafting memos to be able to draw from data and also to ask for more funding and to create more positions. And, you know, sometimes you'll get them, sometimes you don't. But it's very important to get these conversations started and to have a paper trail of requests. And it's also been effective to compare numbers of English learners to numbers of special education students. And sometimes we've seen that with comparable numbers, often the special education area might get more funding than the ESOL. So to make sure, you know, look at the numbers, look at your data and cite the data. And also cite, you know, again, step 3 in the process is know your rights of ELS. So making these comparisons can be particularly powerful. And I'm happy to follow up with some more advice, and I'll give my email address at the end of the session too. Let's see, we have time for just a couple more questions. James asks, how do you hold content teachers accountable for following through on supports for ELL students? There are many ways to do this. First is really developing that trust and level of collaboration, but also making sure that you follow up with them. So maybe, you know, modeling a strategy or giving them a graphic organizer and then saying, hey, well, let's meet, you know, on Friday and let's talk about how it went. So showing that you're keeping up with them and that you're in a way holding them accountable for following through on this. And I'm going to take the last question from Fredrida. I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly. The question is, what types of resources are available for our undocumented youth and families? Specifically, are there resources available that we can use to distribute regarding rights? The number of ICE raids is alarming, and it's important that we give accurate information to our undocumented families. We have a resource on our website about supporting dreamers and undocumented youth, and I'm going to add it to our Padlet for you. So that's definitely a good starting point. And right now, maybe some of you, if you know some resources, you could type it in to the chat as well. I can think of a couple right now, but they're not coming to the top of my mind. So, you know, keep definitely, if you still want to ask questions in the Q&A, we can go ahead and, you know, give you some of these resources on the Padlet afterwards. And I know some of you are asking, is there a way to see who is on the chat so we continue the conversation? And I believe my colleague Kate is addressing that about getting access. And we'll figure out a way. And also, like I said, I encourage you to go on the Padlet so you can continue the conversation with everyone else. So yeah, and that has to do with, you know, how this is set up in Zoom, but we could definitely, you know, share that information with each other, with you, about who is on this, to keep up this valuable conversation. And if you're interested also in advocacy, I'd like to share with you that this summer we're running, and I'm co-facilitating an online course on advocacy from July 2nd to August 10th for 10 professional development hours. It's go at your own pace. You don't have to do anything live. And it's an extension of the Advocating for English Learners book. And the best piece of this is our online professional learning community, where we facilitate conversations and we provide you access to more resources. And that one course is part of our suite of 4 online professional development courses, and all 4 of these will be running this summer. So I encourage you to take a look at them. Advocacy, we have strategies for making content accessible, effectively reaching students with limited or interrupted formal education, or SLIFE. And our new course is strategies to build ELS academic language at the word, sentence, and discourse level. In addition, if you'd like to keep this conversation going, I'd like to encourage you to like our Facebook page. So you can see a link to it here. And I mentioned a little about Colorin Colorado, the wonderful website. They have a whole web page devoted to English learner advocacy resources, and I've shared that link on the Padlet as well with you. So we'll send you another link out to the Padlet, along with a link to this webinar recording when we're finished. Tomorrow, probably not tonight. So you can take a look there as well. And I want to thank you again for all of your participation today. Again, this is me, Diane Sterfener, and my email is diane@getsupported.net. So if you would like to follow up with any questions you might have by email too, please go ahead and do so. And I see that my colleague Jill Kester has shared our Padlet link again. And Padlet is a place, it's free, it's a place to share online tools and conversations. All you have to do is click on the link. You don't have to sign up for anything, and you can add to what others have posted. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in our webinar, and for all of your comments and your willingness to advocate for English learners. So thanks again, and I hope to keep collaborating with you in the future. Thank you.